Hello, my name is Jeffrey Rubinstein. Welcome to Sans Apologia. You can check out all previous episodes at jeffreybrubenstein.com. Check it out. Thanks a lot. Well, if punk rock and reggae music have a common influence, it would be ska. Unlike its offspring reggae, ska is quick and upbeat. But the messages and rhythms that reggae inherits would continue to find its way through nearly any genre of popular music for decades. Today we're going to talk about how much cross-pollination there was, and if there still is, between punk and reggae music. I'll be speaking today with someone who has been playing in the New York punk rock scene since the late 80s. For years, he's been touring the world, working as a sound engineer, as well as in theaters and venues throughout New York City. Welcome to Sans Apologia, my brother. My brother, Keith Rubinstein.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Both you and I have had a long and deep appreciation for music of all kinds, and particularly reggae music. You spent a lot more of your time playing on stages and in clubs playing punk rock reggae music. I was playing reggae music, blues, classic rock, all kinds of music. And there is one big confluence that both of us appreciate, and that is where reggae music intersects with punk rock music. So today we're going to take a look at how music that you're quite familiar with, punk rock music, intersects with reggae music, something that both of us have had a lot of experience playing, listening to, appreciating. So getting into it, let me ask you this, Keith. Casual listeners probably wouldn't assume there is much of a connection between punk rock and reggae music. Before we get into the specific musicians and bands that played a role in this connection, was it the messages coming out of reggae music that appealed to the punk rock crowd and musicians, or was it the sound?
I think a lot of it is very political, obviously. There were messages of anti-racism. I think the people that were getting into punk rock felt oppressed in a way I wouldn't say was similar to their black counterparts, but one could argue that's possible because of the fact that they were poor communities. Mm-hmm. So that might be the common ground.
Okay. Working class.
Yeah. A lot of the influence of the early reggae scene comes from the ska scene, which morphs into rocksteady. But yeah, the early ska scene in Jamaica quickly goes to England, and then a decade later when punk rock emerges, the political landscape seems ripe for very similar ideology.
Okay. Like punk rock, there are many variations and genres of reggae music. Although both of us have been studying and playing music for a long time, you were into a specific type of early Jamaican reggae music that I really don't have much exposure to. I don't really know much about it. DJs like Prince Buster. Were these the artists that were appealing to the mid-80s punk rock scene? Is it a little earlier than that? Is it like late 70s?
Yeah, it's because those are what we would call rocksteady artists, or skinhead reggae, they call it a lot of times. Yeah, okay. And it's because the audience that was watching these guys like Prince Buster and Laurel Aitken, who were from Jamaica and living in England, when they would perform, most of their audience was these white working class kids from London who would shave their heads, and they're called skinheads or rude. It was a take on the Jamaican rude boy culture and mod culture.
But they weren't racist themselves, obviously.
They were mixing with Jamaica. They were appreciating the Jamaican style.
So what happened after that?
The reggae
skinheads
music
just sort of appropriated the look, and then they later were.
The early skinhead look was made by those kids. It was born out of the mod movement. Mm-hmm. So the suits, and that was similar to
suspenders and the.
Yeah, that all comes a little bit later. It's it's just like it's a subculture that evolved based around this, centrally around Jamaican reggae music for sure.
Okay, and the common denominator kind of being working class, struggling against the system, feeling a sense that you're being crushed and that the system doesn't really care. So it's very similar in the spirit of rebellion.
Definitely. And I think that it's different in the United States because the black experience in the United States is centered around the atrocities of slavery. Mm-hmm. And in England, when you have the mix of black and white culture, they were in England to sort of better themselves, much like colonies of the United States come here to better themselves. So it's a different. They did Jamaican people didn't go to England as slaves. They went there willingly, based on like an open border sort of policy
to work. Essentially,
to work, yeah.
Right, for opportunities.
Yep.
And the reason, I'm not the anthropologist here, but the obvious reason being that they were able to speak the language, so it was a natural place. That's why they gravitated to Canada and places like that, the United States, obviously, and England.
Jamaican culture influences English culture dramatically, and that's at that time.
Right.
So it's almost impossible for reggae or Jamaican culture not to influence anything that comes after their settling in England.
Okay.
And that's where
you're talking about through the decades, through England, it's going to be a consistent influence. I mean, and you're talking about the Clash, and you're talking, a little bit later about Amy Winehouse and people who really hooked into, and people who really hooked into the Jamaican culture and Jamaican music, and it continues. I imagine to this day. Obviously, it does. You've been playing me some great music recently that's coming out of England.
Oh yeah, the Skints. We love the Skints.
All right. And then who was there was one you played me. It was a young woman. We might have to.
That wasn't the Skints.
Well, it might have been.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they, but before that, you have the two-tone movement.
Okay. Before what?
Before what's going on now. So, as punk rock is emerging, the influence of ska and punk becomes two-tone. That's like the melting.
But what decade are we talking about?
80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
And it's bands like the Specials and Madness and Bad Manners.
Okay.
And they embraced the early Jamaican culture, and those bands were mixed. They had black members and white members. Okay. And they were very anti-racist, and they had a very strong anti-racist political message to combat the political message that was coming out of England with the National Front and this very fascistic right-wing agenda that was taking over real English politics at the time.
As well as music? Was it infiltrating music?
Yeah, on an underground level with punk rock, for sure. It definitely did not make it.
Were there prominent bands that were expressing this kind of stuff?
It got squashed because the majority of people that were in bands that became popular were not going to go along with this racist agenda. But there were bands that would play. So obviously the first punk bands in England are the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and then you get quickly the working class.
I've never heard much. Is there any reggae influence in the Sex Pistols? I'm not familiar.
Not at all.
Not at all.
No,
I was going to say I can't think of
really
a single of their recordings.
Reggae, but again, if you listen to Don Letts, he talks about when he went to Sex Pistols gigs or he was DJing at Sex Pistols gigs.
And remind us who Don Letts is.
Don Letts was in Big Audio Dynamite. He's a very prominent figure in
DJ, producer.
Yeah, aficionado. He's a musician, singer, songwriter, all that. But he's a real resource for the history because he lived through all of it.
Okay. Still alive?
He's the personification of the connection between punk rock and reggae, I would say.
Perfect. Okay. Very good. And
Big Audio Dynamite. That's him playing with Mick Jones from the Clash.
Okay.
That's a real important
Great album.
connection.
I used to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not as familiar, obviously, with this as you are, but I do remember that Big Audio Dynamite cover, and he's the guy with the big tam, I believe. And,
yeah. It's still
it's like a colorful tam or something.
Yeah, he's a
I
wish
I
dapper
still
guy.
Had that record.
But he was like an original rude boy, and he would talk about his experience.
Born in Jamaica, born in London.
Born in, I believe he's English, but his parents might have been Jamaican immigrants. And then he gets stuck in a school in London, and you really got to watch Rebel Dread and see his history is really interesting.
And Rebel Dread is a documentary on Don Letts?
On Don Letts, yes.
Excellent. Available, probably streaming somewhere? Or?
YouTube or BBC. I think it was a pretty... it was pretty out there. Trojan Records, I'm sure you're familiar with Trojan Records.
Yes.
They get a lot to do with that.
All right, let me ask you this, Keith. Bands like The Clash made their reggae influence explicit, releasing albums of reggae covers such as Black Market Clash. Bad Brains, an American band, is probably the most obvious example of a punk reggae fusion. Who are some of the other punk bands or figures that were influenced by reggae music? Or are there reggae artists influencing the punk scene?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think you can really hear a good example of this in the late 80s. There's a band called Operation Ivy, and they uniquely blend ska and punk and reggae all together into their music.
Operation Ivy.
Operation Ivy was a band that was short-lived,
From
but greatly influential, from East Bay, California, San Francisco, Berkeley, California. And they became a band called Rancid, which is wildly popular. They influenced bands like Green Day, who were huge pop bands and pop. They were like the first band before No Doubt. No Doubt's a good example of a pop band that embraces punk roots and ska and reggae as well. Operation Ivy is a really good example of a band that musically was able to take the two, reggae or punk and ska, and just mash it together. I would say the entire time the through line is politics.
Okay, that's important.
It really is. And the politics of it is centered around unity and anti-racism. Mm-hmm. A lot of that bleeds into activism in certain ways.
Even today?
Sure. More so today, I would say, than before. And that's because a lot of the younger generation now is wildly politically active and knows how to use music and social media and the things available to them to get their message out, which is, encouraging.
All right. Well, the reverse doesn't seem as obvious. I don't really know too many of reggae bands that infused punk. Do you know of any, or?
Not like from Jamaica. No, I don't think there's any sort of punk bands like that are because that's what it would be. It would be a punk band from Jamaica. I don't know of any.
Right. I just have one strange
or Jamaican guys in England or something like that, or even in New York. But like we talked about, the Bad Brains is even though they're Americans, would probably be the only band that I could think of that really they were directly connected to the hardcore Rasta reggae movement.
This is
as well
Washington, D.C.
They were from Washington, D.C. They are often considered the grandfathers of hardcore, which is a much more extreme version of punk rock.
Okay.
And that's interesting to me in and of itself, because, again, we can always go back to, any genre of music, whatever it is, it's going to go back to some black musician who invented that.
100%. It must be the rhythm. Be the rhythm.
Yeah. Punk rock is no exception. There are bands like Death is a good example. They were one of the earliest punk bands.
That's an all-black punk band.
Yeah,
right?
a trio from Detroit, I believe.
Okay.
But they were influenced by MC5.
I think that's a Netflix documentary, a band called Death.
Yep. Great documentary.
Okay.
And they were influenced by MC5.
Okay.
Who were really politically active. They were really a lot of people consider them the first punk band.
One thing I've noticed over the years is that a lot of music, particularly music that descends from black culture, music then becomes a method of expressing resistance to the point of militancy. In Brazil, they would call it militancy. In reggae music, you hear that in the diaspora. Anybody that is in the Western Hemisphere that is black is essentially using music at some point as an expression of rebellion, and that's a common characteristic of this type of music. And apparently, it's just as true in punk and the origins of hardcore. Obviously,
sure, and we can ask ourselves why. And we did touch on that before.
That's a great
and
question.
I believe it's related to the thing that often gets ignored, which is the class,
right? The
working class being oppressed, because that is transcendent of race, in my opinion. In the United States, even, I'm not saying there isn't racism, but but class is often overlooked, and the common denominator in all of this rebellious nature is the people that are oppressed are being oppressed by people with more resources and more money.
There's a very famous quote from, I believe I have this right, W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, the question of the 20th century was race. The question of the 21st century will be class.
I would hope that's true, only if
we
don't ignore race or racism, because that's still a thing that can't be ignored or discounted.
Well, I think what
However,
I
think we ignore
what he was
classism
suggesting. I
much
think what he
more.
was suggesting is that those divisions that were based on race will be replaced by divisions based on class. You will not have solved any problems ultimately because you have just replaced one oppressive system for another. So it wouldn't be the race that would be the issue ultimately, but as you are saying exactly, it would be an issue of class, not race. That's what W.E.B. Du Bois is saying. I don't know if that's going to make it into the podcast either, but
But this is good stuff, though. I think
it can be. It can be.
that's where we're getting deep on this. No,
it's true. It's true. Yeah, yeah. But my concern is always whether or not it's accurate. If what we're saying is accurate,
we're just having a discussion, though.
Yes.
So it could be. It's a point of view. Not necessarily. Yeah,
well,
we should fact check ourselves. I agree that.
Or even fact check whether or not W.E.B. Du Bois actually said that, and I might have misquoted,
or
at least I can't remember.
But see, this is good though because this is to me this is interesting.
Yeah.
Because this is what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, that is an important part.
Specifically, and with punk rock, and the common denominator is that that rebellion from working class shouting at the elite.
And it seems that music as an art form has an ability to convey that in a way that I don't think any other art form can convey that. And I think part of the reason why is because you don't gather with groups of people necessarily to look at a painting or read a work of literature, but you do gather with groups of people to be moved, physically moved by this force of music.
Yeah.
And it has a power that I don't think other art forms have.
No, and we've both been to concerts where I've never felt more moved by an artist than when I saw Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros.
Okay.
And it was he was a force of nature. Did you ever see him perform, The Clash?
No,
or any of that?
Never saw them perform, no.
Did Mike ever see The Clash?
I don't know.
Our brother?
I don't know.
I don't know. There was a guy I played with in a band who opened for The Clash, which was a real interesting thing. But to see Joe Strummer on stage was indescribable because it was, I think, in the late 90s, early aughts. And we were in New York, we were specifically dealing with Rudy Giuliani. This was pre 9/11. And there was a lot of, I don't know how to put it. There was a lot of tension in the city. And I remember Joe Strummer comes and he's quite angry with the fact that people weren't doing enough to stand up to the man. And yeah, it was profound. I felt guilty. I wasn't doing enough because Joe Strummer told me I wasn't doing enough. It was the most powerful thing.
Well, he kind of, I think you described him well, a force of nature. He had that ability that I see. We're getting off the topic slightly, but there's that ability for certain musicians to completely commit to what they're doing, and Strummer in particular used it for political activism to move people, just like you said, not unlike Rage Against the Machine tries to do.
No, and I feel like when they were around and he was still alive, he really appreciated that.
Joe Strummer.
Yeah, he was a humble type of guy.
Yeah,
I never saw anything like that.
Well, actually, I did find references to punk rock reggae music, even in the king of reggae music's discography. Bob Marley actually makes some references to the punk scene he saw firsthand in England and L.A. in the song Punky Reggae Party, where he sings, "I'm saying the Wailers will be there, the Damned, the Jam, the Clash, Maytals will be there, Dr. Feelgood too." So it should also be noted that this is also probably the only Bob Marley song that uses the word fart. I don't have those lyrics in front of us, but even the king of reggae could write some clunkers. I don't know about anybody else, but this was never one of my favorite Bob Marley songs. Can't remember exactly what album it comes out on. I think it's Confrontation, but it was something posthumous possibly. Just kind of a goofy tune, but he's obviously reflecting on the punk musicians and bands that he was coming into contact with. So you know a lot more about these bands than I do. Of course, I know the Clash. The Wailers are going to be there, but the Damned, the Jam, the Clash, and then he mentions Maytals will be there too.
Yeah,
that's obviously Toots and the Maytals. Remind me who are the Damned and the Jam?
The Damned is one of the earlier punk bands from England, like the Sex Pistols and the Clash. I saw them 2 or 3 years ago. They played at Madison Square Garden.
Wow, so they're still playing up until this day.
They opened for the Misfits.
Oh, wow.
Which was pretty incredible. Also, not a punk band like that playing at Madison Square Garden was pretty interesting. And the Jam are another really good early English punk band. They were heavily influenced by the mod culture of England.
And that's reflected in Quadrophenia by The Who.
The Who, yeah. And the early Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Police. Okay. Sting was in Quadrophenia. Those guys were all mods, and that is related to the reggae influence. The mods were first in the subculture series of events. So there were mods in England listening to soul music, and then you have a heavy Jamaican influence come in, and that mod style morphs into the early skinhead.
Wow.
And mods was first.
Kind of interesting how much Amy Winehouse actually embodies all of those traditions. Seems like mods, the soul thing, reggae, of course.
She has great taste in music, so she hit all the right. Yeah.
London.
Yeah. And she hit all the right. But I believe that's quintessentially England.
Right.
That somebody like her is going to be so great because of those influences.
Right.
And you really couldn't get that anywhere else. America has similar things, but not anything, it's similar, but that could only happen in England.
Right.
And it's because of the connection between Jamaica and their influence on English subcultures and English music in general.
It's their shepherd's pie.
To this day, there's even the language. If you ever watch anything related to any youth subculture in England, half of their language is like patois from Jamaica.
Oh, and of course, Sacha Baron Cohen, when he was Ali G, he was doing that whole Ali G thing, which was sort of a goofy white guy who is adopting patois, but it was hilarious.
Yeah.
It was absolutely fantastic.
His favorite music is jungle music.
Oh, jungle, that DJ music that sort of speeds up the tempo.
It's like dancehall on crack.
Yeah, right. I remember it was real popular, like in the mid to late 90s.
Sure, I listen to it every day still.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's still got the same energy as it's important here because that music has the same energy as like hardcore and punk rock, but strictly digital and still has a major reggae influence. It's an interesting cross section of a lot of different things.
Right. Also in Bob Marley's song, we do get this verse as well. Rejected by society, treated with impunity, protected by my dignity, I fought for reality. Yeah. New wave, all right, new craze, new wave, new craze. So there it is right there. He's really expressing a lot of what we've been talking about today. The cross-section between punk and reggae music are these lines right here. 100. To be rejected by society, treated with impunity, protected by my dignity, which I'm sure you appreciate. And that's, I think, what you're sort of describing when you're bringing up people like Joe Strummer. He's talking about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first, what's that first line? Rejected by society.
Right.
That could be the key to all of it. That's what all of us feel. And that's the common denominator.
So even
not being, accepted anywhere. Being an outcast.
Even in Bob Marley's, arguably one of his worst songs, he has a series of incredible lines here that you can't get away from. He's basically articulating exactly what we're talking about. Not the greatest song, but, I guess Bob Marley's worst song is still great and insightful. But and you listen to the song yourself. He does actually talk about old farts.
Yeah, this is new to me, and I'm a huge Bob Marley fan.
Yeah, you probably
because of you, but I didn't know the lyrics to this song particularly. I didn't know that he was shouting out the Jam and the Clash, the Jam and the Damn. That's amazing.
I knew this. I remembered this song, Punky Reggae Party. It was just something I definitely had remembered, but didn't really know the lyrics until I was doing a little bit of research for this episode. But to leave farts for just a minute.
Okay.
Is this the connection you were referencing earlier when we started by asking, is this the message coming out of reggae music that was resonating with the punk rock community?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the fact that, like I said before, I did not know these lyrics that we were talking about here. But yeah, Bob Marley, not out of character, quite eloquently, explains that particular time period and the connection between reggae and punk, at least from his point of view, which is important.
Oh, it never did appear on a studio album. It was released as a single, but it must have been on some compilation that I had heard. I had remembered the song.
I know
for
the
sure.
song, yeah. I've heard it before.
Must be
Was
on
it on
maybe
Exodus?
It was a B-side, I think, of something, but it wasn't released on Exodus. Okay.
We all know Bob Marley is a revolutionary, and that is the common thread with all this.
Absolutely.
Joe Strummer, I believe, was also a revolutionary in a similar capacity.
I don't think I oblige exaggeration too much, but I've often called him the most dangerous musician who's ever lived. He was
Bob Marley?
Bob Marley, yeah.
I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that.
Well, yeah, if you really know his story, not that nonsense that came out in that movie, but if you know...
I don't even know what movie you're talking about.
Oh, good. You don't need to.
All right. Unspoken.
Keith, one final question that I always ask whenever I have one of these great conversations about music. What's going on today? It seems that we spend a lot of time talking about music that we love so much, but it tends to be decades old. We're going back now to soul music. We're going to the 60s and the 70s with punk and new wave and reggae. But what I'm curious about is what's going on today. Is the punk rock scene still aligning itself with mutual values like self-determination, skepticism toward government, and resistance to fascism? Are they still infusing reggae rhythms, melodies, and syncopation in punk rock? Is that cross-section still fertile ground?
Absolutely. I see it all the time. Okay. Whether it's specific bands that are incorporating these particular genres together, or shows that I go to where there's a stack bill where there may be 3 or 4 hardcore bands and a reggae band opening up, which is the way it used to be. So there is without a doubt this is still alive and well, and a vehicle for people to express themselves.
You were showing me recently this week. You've been showing me some of the bands. I know the Skints are a contemporary band. They're around.
There's some bands in New York that are really good that I see a lot. There's been some shows at Tompkins Square Park, and you hear this band called The Captures a lot, and they're a straight reggae band. Their members are members that were in pretty prominent hardcore bands. There's another band I really love that is almost impossible to define called Butterbrain, which we'll play for you after this, which is funk and reggae and soul and ska. All, like Fishbone is a good example.
Okay, yeah, sure.
They're still playing, and they're involved with this.
Still playing Fishbone.
Yeah, Norwood plays with a lot of these bands. I don't know if he lives in New York or he's in New York all the time. And that's kind of, that scene is all still alive. And there's a whole new generation of kids, and they love it, and they see it as a way for them to express themselves. And they know that, like, with punk rock, the DIY ethic was born there.
Yeah.
So, they're like, we're going to put on our own shows. You
talk about a DIY ethic. You have to go back to Kingston and Lee Scratch Perry.
Absolutely, that's another common denominator.
Yeah, making spring reverbs out of car parts and stuff like that.
That is also a very, very common thread. Is we're gonna make something out of nothing here,
right?
Because we don't have anything else going on. You know, like we got a shitty job. Pardon my French. Or we got this is all I have is this music. I can put on a show here in the park or on the street or in some little bar or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't need to be in a stadium. That's the anti.
And you work with the resources that you have at hand.
Yeah, that's alive and well. I'm always enamored of younger generations that take what's available and do something new with it and really take it to the next level. It's a cliche, I get it, but they're using the resources they have now, which is something we didn't have, the internet and all these ways to market yourself and get your things out there. And I'm always really blown away by what younger people do with something that I did before or my friends did or our generations before us that we still appreciate. And now you see, like, you go to shows and the age range is like, from 13, 14 years old getting wild in the pit with like 50, 60-year-olds, and it's pretty awesome.
Right.
But I live in New York. I don't know if that's the same everywhere. I see videos. It looks like it is.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Keith. I think what we've done here is really take a closer look at that intersection between punk and reggae music. And as you've reiterated and what I continuously discover is that music is a vehicle for many people, regardless of social class, regardless of ethnicity, to convey a message of resistance, a message of awareness and self-determination. And I think that's probably why you and I have had so many mutual interests in music, and in that thread, whether it's reggae or it's punk or it's blues music or rock music or whatever it may be, is I think we're interested in and attracted to music that is actually trying to compel people to resist what is obvious. And if you are of lower social class, or if you're of working class, and you don't have many options to express yourself, it seems that music has been the best way to convey that message.
I agree. Punk rock in particular is a good avenue because it's simplistic. And it's a good it's a good way to express yourself directly.
It's a type of folk music, and folk in the very broadest sense, because what folk music is music that was created by the people. That's what folk means, obviously, and it's music that you don't have to be able to read notation. You don't have to have a deep musical theory background to be able to play it. Folk music is music, any music that's created by the people.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you about this subject.
Oh, thank you, Keith. And you can hear other episodes of Sans Apologia. Go to the website, jeffreybrubenstein.com. There are other episodes, and we'll have more to come soon enough. Thanks a lot for listening.